Are you looking to figure out what might be triggering your IBS? Maybe you're frustrated by the lack of information you're getting from your current provider, your healthcare provider. Maybe you've been told that there is no trigger, there's nothing you can do, take the medication. Well, my name is Dr. Terranella, and in my practice I treat a lot of people with IBS, and there are things you can do. And in this video we're going to talk about the 5 categories of things that I look at when someone has IBS. So you'll get 5 key things to consider what might be triggering your IBS. And maybe you were told that foods are not trigger. In my experience, they are. Treating hundreds of people with IBS. So we'll get into these as categories. So I'm not going to give you just 5 foods. We're going to talk about the categories of things, including food, that tend to be higher, more likely of a trigger. Now there may be 6 and 7 and maybe 10 of them, depending on how you look at it. They're all sort of interrelated. We tend to conceptualize these things and break them down so that we can think about them, but they're all sort of interrelated. So your mood may affect your digestion, which may affect your microbiome and all these things. But I'm going to break it down into 5 categories for you so you can better understand what might be triggering your issues. Not everyone's the same this way. So we want to look at each category separately, and then you might want to think about how these things are interrelated. Maybe I'll post another video on some of these interrelationships and dynamics of the IBS triggers. So the first IBS trigger I want to share with you today is stress and anxiety. So this could be a trigger kind of as an immediate thing for some people. They might get stressed and anxious and immediately have to go to the bathroom, or they get more constipated. But in the chronic sense, what's kind of going on there is you're sort of shifting the body's energy away from the normal digestive function. So if you're stressed out and you're eating, what happens is your body has two main modes of functioning: rest and digest, and fight or flight. And this is tied in with the autonomic nervous system. So the parasympathetic is more rest and digest, and the sympathetic is more fight or flight. So if you're stressed out and eating food, you're going to not be activating the parasympathetic, which is needed for enzyme production, proper peristalsis, the migrating motor complex in the small intestine. These are all things that are an inherent part of what's happening when you eat food without you even thinking about it. So if you're stressed out, you may not be producing as much enzymes. That could lead to the food sitting there longer, which can lead to constipation. So it just takes longer for food to move through. In some cases too, it may lead to diarrhea because the food particles aren't digested, so they're not absorbed, and water can rush in there, leading to more of a osmotic type of diarrhea. So that's the first food or first IBS trigger I would say is pretty important to consider, is just what's the inherent digestive function, and how is stress and anxiety affecting your inherent digestive function. Many times when people have digestive issues in IBS, there's a component of stress and anxiety going on. Okay, so the second trigger here that we want to look at for IBS triggers is microbial. There's actually a subset of IBS referred to as post-infectious IBS. And what's happening here typically is you get like a flu or some sort of GI bug. That's usually like a 24 or 48 hour thing, and then after that you never really recover. So your digestive tract is either in a chronic state of inflammation, never really recovers from that, or something shifted there in the intestines or the small intestine or large intestine, typically the large intestine, that prevents the normal function of the digestive tract to kind of resync or get back on track. And so that's called post-infectious IBS. There's there's theories on why that happens. Is it leaky gut or things like that. So we're not going to get into too much detail on what the mechanism of post-infectious is, but there's other microbial triggers too. So for instance, pathogenic microbes like parasites, for instance, if you're traveling, sometimes even if you're not traveling, people still get parasites, even here in the US. And sometimes there's pathogenic microbes that are only pathogenic when they're in larger quantities. So these are called potentially pathogenic microbes. There's also SIBO, which many of you probably heard of, and SIFO. So SIBO is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, which I referred to with the stress and anxiety. The migrating motor complex not working properly can be a trigger with SIBO, and potentially SIFO as well, where SIFO is small intestinal fungal overgrowth. So these are some microbial things to think about. There's also just a dysbiosis picture, which means imbalance in the microbes, the normal inherent microbes that are supposed to be there in the large intestines. So you may have excess of certain strains and species and not enough of others. That's dysbiosis. So those are some microbial triggers to think about. So the third IBS trigger to think about is diet. Now, a lot of people believe that there's some dietary component to what's triggering them, but sometimes they just can't quite pinpoint what it is, or it may change from time to time. So I wanted to give you a little bit of ways to think about diet and how it may be triggering your IBS symptoms or digestive issues. And then the other thing is conventional medicine seems to kind of throw that out, like, oh yeah, diet, it's not diet. It's nothing you can do dietarily is going to affect it. I think that's been called into question more recently with more research going on. But conventional wisdom says diet isn't going to affect it, which in my experience is not true at all. So here's some things I think about with diet. So processed food, kind of junk food type stuff in general is not going to be good for people with IBS because they're more sensitive. There's potentially more inflammation going on in their system, and processed food has more pesticides in it by nature. The more processing that's occurring, the cheaper the food, the more pesticides and things that are going to be on that food. And that's just the nature of how packaged food and cheaper food is going to be produced. So if you're someone that's really sensitive and has more of an IBS picture, you may want to shift your diet more towards organic. The pesticides in there can cause inflammation for some people if you're not able to break those pesticides down. Now, it's not good for any of us, but for certain genetic types, they may have more of a problem with pesticides. The other thing, food-wise, is food sensitivities can cause issues. There's an immunological component, which is we're going to talk about in a minute, and there's also foods that may trigger someone more if they have more of a microbial component. So as I said earlier, all these things are kind of intertwined. There's not, if you have stress and anxiety, you may be more sensitive to certain foods from a diet perspective. It may trigger more of an immune reaction. So which may eventually lead to some sort of microbial imbalance. So all these things are intertwined, but we're going to sort of compartmentalize here for a moment. So diet-wise, you may have sort of processed food, you may have immune related foods, such as food sensitivities, foods that are going to be triggering microbial reaction, and then you may have histamine intolerance that's triggering more of a leaky gut picture, and you still may have yet another category that's more of an autoimmune type of reaction, like celiacs. So diet is very important, and it's important to figure out which foods might be triggering you, but you don't necessarily want to just eliminate the foods that are triggering you without taking the necessary steps to also consider whether or not there's microbial, autoimmune, or other things going on there as well. If it's just the food and you remove it, everything should get better. And there's lots of potential food triggers. The top 3 food sensitivities would be gluten, dairy, and eggs. And then there's low FODMAP foods, there's fructose, lots and lots of food things to consider. So the fourth IBS trigger that I want to mention is something occurring with the immune system. Now, diet is one of those bigger things that can trigger the immune system. The reason that digestion is so important, or why I tend to emphasize this with my patients, is because if your digestive tract is not working properly, your immune system is going to be more likely to be triggered. So the thing you want to figure out is why your immune system was triggered to begin with. Once you solve that, you may not react to so many foods. As an example, a lot of people go on diets and say, well, I'm just going to eliminate all these foods, and I felt so great, but then when they reintroduce those foods, they don't feel so great. And so maybe the food itself, and your immune system just can't handle that. And sometimes it's more of an issue with your gut microbiome and what's going on there. So it's important to kind of tease that apart. But so there's, as far as the immune system getting involved, there's food sensitivities and food allergies, and those are just different tags that the immune system puts on the food components as they enter the body. So an allergy is a more severe reaction typically, and a sensitivity is a more mild reaction. Then there's also autoimmune reactions, which is things like celiac disease. And then there's, Crohn's and colitis, which is also, but not really related to food. Well, it can be related to food, but classically is not thought to be related to food. But Crohn's and colitis is an autoimmune disease where the body's attacking the intestines. Then there's also histamine intolerance, where the body's not breaking down histamines. And those are the basic ideas around the immune system getting activated and kind of triggering IBS symptoms. So we want to figure out why the immune system's getting activated to begin with, take care of that. If it's just a food, eliminate the food. It should, things should get better on their own. Sometimes you have to bring in, leaky gut type things to fix that. But so there's various testing you can do to figure out and sort of triage, what's important, what's most important there. All right, so there you can see all 5 of them now, and the last one is genetics. So there's certain genotypes and alterations in your genes that can leave one more susceptible to having IBS, or being more triggered by certain foods like dietary things, or having immunodeficiency, so immune system issues, or if you may have more stress and anxiety based on your genetics, you're more susceptible to these things. So I wanted to go through a couple things related to genetics. Now, there's tons of genetic links, but the ones that I think probably are important. So stress and anxiety, anything that's going to limit your breakdown of the stress neurotransmitters or neuropeptides. Mainly COMT here and MAOA are the two that come to or MAOB. And a little bit MAOA as well. If you don't know what those are, check out some of my other videos on COMT and you'll find out about that. Microbial, so there's some FUT SNPs that have to do with how well your they can influence how your probiotics or good bacteria stick and stay in your intestines. There's probably other genetics related to that. This is the one I'm familiar with, and they don't do just that. They actually have other functions as well, but the FUT, certain FUTs are more important for whether or not your microbes are going to stick and stay in your intestines, and the diversity of your microbiome may be compromised if you have a lot of alterations in your FUT genes. Diet, of course, you have certain susceptibility in genes, or you could say SNPs, related to gluten sensitivity. There's HLA type genes related to this, and a couple others. And then, of course, there's peanut allergies and that are genetic related, and there's also dairy allergy or lactose intolerance that's genetic as well. For the immune, there's also like immunodeficiency, which is more of a genetic mutation, but there's probably SNPs too that are related to whether or not you're making enough immune cells, and there's different lines of immune cells that may come into play. There's IgA deficiency, there's different immunoglobulin deficiencies, so lots to do with the immune system, but the main one would be immunoglobulin deficiencies, which there's different variations of that, some that are not super uncommon, but I don't know the exact statistics. But so number 5 is genetics. All right, guys, so hopefully this info was useful for you and helping you better understand what might be triggering your IBS. If it was, please click on the like button. That helps me to figure out what kind of content you guys like the most. There's more detail we can go in with each of these, and so I'll probably be posting more videos on all of these 5 categories in the future. So if you like this type of content, please subscribe to the channel, because I will be posting more videos very soon. We'll see you next time.